Idaho Democrats ended their state convention yesterday, as they always do, professing party unity. But in reality, Idaho Democrats, as they usually are split over their party platform and over who should be the party's presidential candidate. We'll be talking about that tonight. And we'll also hear a major excerpt of the speech that Idaho Democrats heard this weekend from Bethune Church.
What we need is restraint and judgment. The world's too varied and dangerous a place for insecure men who seem obsessed with the need to show how tough they are.
Good evening. Will Rogers once said he was a member of no organized political party. He was a Democrat. Well, Idaho Democrats must have been wondering just a little bit this weekend about how organized their party really is. It took Democrats most of yesterday afternoon, actually most of yesterday, to write their party platform. They argued at times over every dot and tittle in the platform. In the end, they came away saying they were united as a party, but in fact they may have created some real political problems for some Democratic candidates by endorsing the Equal Rights Amendment and seeming to come close to endorsing a Republican-sponsored Idaho Wilderness Bill. Two journalists will be along here shortly to tell us what shape Democrats find themselves in as their convention comes to an end. Even the seating arrangements for Saturday's convention banquet became a little controversial. Democratic candidates for the U.S. Senate and the Congress in the 1st District were mysteriously missing Saturday night from the head table. And when it came time for Democratic Senate candidate Pete Bush of Lewiston to make his speech, well, he had to be retrieved out of the audience.
When you are faced with a task such as I, to run against a man such as Jim McClure, who voted against Martin Luther King Day, I find that symbolic of what's going to happen in 1984. I look forward to working with the people of Idaho that will support decency, education, and stop funding and financing MX missile systems, chemical nerve gas, and neutron bombs. And let's put our... Thank you. Hi, Myrna. I'm having too good of a time. I'd better leave now while I'm on top. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks. Sit down.
Post Falls Democrat Fred Craner, a political unknown until he announced against Republican Congressman Larry Craig, was also left off the dais, and the governor had to go into the audience to escort him up.
Come on, Sally, stand right up here. Come on, get over here.
My name is Fred Craner, and I'm your stepchild, 1st congressional candidate from North Idaho. I'd like to tell you a little something about myself. In the 30s, my father lost his farm near Bliss on the Snake River during the Hoover administration. After that, he said there's a lesson in everything. And he now has 136 descendants, and we're all Democrats.
Second District congressional candidate Richard Stallings, who most Democrats think can beat George Hansen, joked about a comment made recently by a Hansen staff member.
The moral snake is grateful. I think we have a couple of psychologists here. My opponent has got this thing about reptiles. First of all, it was dragons, and now snakes. There's something a little kinky about that, but... And this is overwhelming. How exciting this is to be here. We spent the day in Paul. You laugh. You need to go to Paul. That's a great place to be. We did the parade this afternoon, shook about 400 or 500 hands, passed out a lot of balloons. We missed this, but we felt we could get more votes in Paul. It's good to be here. I'm pleased to be here with Pete, and it's good to meet Mr. Craner, and we're going to have a good year this year. Our opposition is giving us a lot of help. We need to thank them, and we'll do it in November. Now, we've got this plan. My opponent claims that what he's doing, there's nothing wrong with it. And someone pointed out to me tonight that, you know, men have been after Hansen for years, and it took a lady judge. So the plan is this. Only congressmen have to fill out those kind of forms. So after November, we'll retire him, and then he can borrow all the money he wants from the Hunts, and it won't be illegal. But we need your help to do it, and we will do it in November.
Democratic congressional candidate Richard Stallings at the Democratic Convention Saturday. Democrats were congratulating themselves yesterday for adopting unanimously a peace plank in their party platform. It calls for, among other things, a nuclear freeze and immediate arms control talks with the Soviets.
Because it occurs to me, and it may occur to you, that the problem of nuclear weapons and our relationship with the Soviet Union in the nuclear age are problems which cannot be stated or defined all that simply. It's very easy to say, sure, we've got too many nuclear weapons and we're about to blow the world up, and it's easy to say, gee, we can't continue on the path that we've been on. We've got to get the Russians to agree to a nuclear freeze of some sort, and so on and so forth. That's easy to say. But the problem, I think, of nuclear weapons is much more complex than that, because it involves a revolution, a complete turnaround in our approach to arms control and military strategy, and that's not easy.
In the end, Idaho Democrats carefully skirted the issue of the proposed new production reactor at the Idaho National Engineering Laboratory near Idaho Falls. That facility, strongly supported in eastern Idaho, would produce the material for nuclear weapons. Republicans, particularly Senator James McClure, generally favor the facility. And Kathy Kreilkamp of Twin Falls thought Idaho Democrats ought to say something about it.
The INEL dumps 1,000 gallons of radioactive water into the aquifer, our water source, every day.
In the platform plank dealing with human resources, some delegates complained that migrant farm workers were being left out.
That this platform does not address the issue of the farm worker. We've talked about the farmer here. We've talked about the earlier platform, peace, and, well, to some people out there, food on the table is more important than nuclear bombs and what have you.
And I think that farm workers traditionally do not vote because they don't see anything, no reason why they should vote. And the Democratic Party has to appeal to the farm workers.
Aberdeen farmer Dwight Horsch, who also serves in the legislature, led the efforts to prevent the writing of a platform that in some way would be critical of farmers.
We as Democrats have worked in opposition to the agriculture community in this state too long. As a 6-year legislator, I think it's about time that we start realizing that farmers are much closer to the working stiff and the lunch bucket carrier than they are the Ralph Comstocks that are the presidents of the First Security Bank. If we keep attacking in any way, in any form, that agricultural community, you're going to wonder why there's only 3 or 4 of us. John was sitting up here a minute ago. Harold Reed's out here as a delegate. 3 or 4 of us in the legislature that are Democrat farmers. We're a rare breed. You talk about a minority, I have been one for 6 years.
Democrats finally did work out a compromise on that platform plank that seemed to satisfy everyone. However, Idaho Republicans who hold their convention in 2 weeks can be almost sure to explicitly endorse the NPR project in eastern Idaho. It is unlikely that they will endorse a nuclear freeze. Still, Democrats say their peace plank is politically viable.
There's always kind of a worry that people are going to think maybe it's goes too far, or maybe people aren't quite ready for it. But I really do believe that the people in the United States want the nuclear arms race to stop. And it was really an affirmation of that today to see it unanimously adopted with such spirit.
The convention has really dealt with the nuclear freeze rather than dealing with specific issues in the state, such as the NPR. I think that that's very wise, because at this point the NPR is not something that we need to take a major position on, because we're not sure it's going to be a reality yet. I think most of us here feel that we need to see what the pros and cons of it are, the environmental impact statement, and then make our decisions based upon the facts rather than upon what we think might happen.
Is that a viable position for you, though, in light of the fact that a lot of Republicans, particularly from your part of eastern Idaho, very, very much behind that project?
They're behind it to the same degree that I think a lot of other people are opposing it, and that is based upon what we think is going to happen. No one really knows even what kind of NPR, whether we're going to have a heavy water or a gas-cooled. You know, there's so many unknowns that I think that, for example, if it was determined that this was going to be a major change in Idaho's economy, for example, that it took a great deal of water that we might really endanger down-river water users, then I think that support would wane very rapidly. So I think we need to answer the questions before we get really excited one way or the other about this.
Some additional analysis on the things Democrats say they stand for now from two reporters who covered the convention here in Boise this past weekend. Randy Staples is a longtime observer of Idaho politics. He's the editorial page editor of the Idaho State Journal newspaper in Pocatello, and Rod Grammer is the political editor of the Idaho Statesman newspaper in Boise. Rod, do you think Democrats did themselves some damage by the platform they came up with?
Well, I think so, Mark, a little bit, especially on the ERA. As you know, that's a very unpopular issue in the eastern part of the state, and they endorsed it in their platform, used the exact wording from the first section of the proposed Equal Rights Amendment. And I think that's going to be difficult for Democrats to run on.
And they were badly split over that. It was a very close vote as to whether to include it.
It was a very close vote on the first time around. The second time around, when they were going to put it in the overall platform section, it was a little wider, but it was a very divisive and long debate over it.
Randy Staples in Pocatello, Patricia McDermott from your city cautioned the delegates that they could be causing some legislative candidates to lose elections on that issue alone.
Well, I think the votes on a lot of these issues, from ERA to the peace issue to NPR to a number of others, all came down to the pragmatists versus the idealists. I think that within that group, probably a substantial majority were on the side of favoring the ERA, favoring a plank on the NPR, but there was a large number of people who simply felt that would hurt candidates. So I think it was the pragmatists on one side and the idealists on the other, and it seems that the pragmatists lost in some of these cases.
And the pragmatists are the ones who in many cases might be running for election.
That's exactly right. Well, Stallings would be a prime example of that. He knows what the dangers are and the risks are of opposing NPR, of supporting the ERA, and some of these other issues along the lines. And in fact, I think that from what action I saw in committee, it seems that once these issues were explained within smaller committees, in smaller groups, they were more easily quashed. At one point in one subcommittee, both the ERA and abortion issues were determined to be issues that the convention ought not address for pragmatic reasons. Once out on the floor, though, a few of the idealistic people simply decided that, no, this is something we ought to address, and in effect, the candidates be damned.
Rod, I heard the figure bandied around this weekend that as many as 45% of the convention delegates were new to the convention process. In other words, they were attending their first state convention. Is that one of the reasons why Democrats came up with some controversial planks?
Well, Mark, I think that's one reason they did. But the Democratic Party is, as you mentioned in the beginning of the show, it's very disorganized. Another way of saying it is it's just a party of factions. And I think that was very clear from this weekend's convention, that the Democratic Party is really made up of a bunch of loose factions, and they all have their own agenda. And a couple of these agendas got through the platform, a couple didn't. But I think that's one of the reasons why the Democrats adopted these.
Rod, in a way, Democrats wound up repudiating their own governor and their Senate candidate on the wilderness issue, too.
Yeah, Mark, they took out of the platform a proposal for 1.2 million acres of minimum of wilderness and inserted a balanced wilderness bill. It was very nebulous. And then they realized that they had handed the wilderness issue to the Republicans and inserted language condemning McClure's wilderness bill.
You said that Democrats are a party of factions, but why do they have so much trouble getting unified when the Idaho Republican Party seems to have not nearly as much trouble doing that?
Well, I think it's the nature of the party. I mean, first of all, you have eastern Idaho, you have the Democratic Party's in favor of the ERA, yet in eastern Idaho, people are strongly opposed to it. The Democratic Party seems to favor wilderness, yet in northern Idaho, a predominantly Democratic area, a lot of people up there oppose wilderness. So it's a party that stretches out across the state for many factions and many interests.
Randy, what does this lack of organization on the part of the Democrats say about their election prospects as we go into not only these races at the top of the ticket, but perhaps even more importantly for them in the long term, capturing some seats in the legislature? Are they in a position to do that?
Well, it just expresses the philosophical range in the party. It's probably a much broader philosophical range than there is in the Republican Party. I think that the ability of the Democrats to capture specific seats varies around the state, of course. A southern Idaho Democrat, in some cases, is not going to necessarily have the same outlook as a northern Idaho Democrat. It has partly to do with the regions in the state, too.
I think it's pretty clear after this weekend that Democrats think their best chance at a major victory would be the Stallings-Hansen race.
Oh, definitely, definitely. The other two candidates got in too late. They're still not all that well known. The business about Stallings appearing at the head table well ahead of the other two may have been an oversight, but I think it's one that a lot of the Democrats can probably identify with. They don't see the other two as nearly as credible candidates.
Just in a word, do you agree with that, Rod?
Yeah, I do, Mark. This whole convention was aimed at protecting Richard Stallings, and the whole weekend.
Well, I thank you both for being here today and talking about it with us. Rod Grammer in Boise and Randy Staples in Pocatello. Thank you, Randy. Idaho will be sending 11 delegates, I should say, Idaho will send 11 delegates to the National Convention in San Francisco, pledged to Gary Hart. 7 are pledged to Walter Mondale, the rest of them uncommitted. And despite the fact that Mondale says he has the nomination wrapped up, Idaho Democrats, regardless of which of the candidates they support, say the nomination is not necessarily decided.
I think that when we look at the national picture, that Walter Mondale does have the nomination wrapped up in San Francisco. But I would concur that that isn't really the feeling of this convention here. From an Idaho perspective, I think people are rallying around Gary Hart.
I certainly do believe that Mr. Mondale has the delegates and that those delegates will hold solid in San Francisco.
My understanding is that delegates are not bound to vote for their pledge on the first ballot. So it's very difficult to tell what could happen. So potentially Hart or possibly another candidate could be elected.
I do know that the Hart people are still working hard, working on the uncommitted delegates and also working on some of the Mondale delegates, because as you may know, none of them are legally bound on the ballots. So I still think it's too close to say.
Is it your sense that there's just some vague dissatisfaction with the prospect of Mondale being the nominee?
Well, I think the concern is that Mr. Reagan has been such an abominably bad president that we want to assure ourselves that we have a very broad-based ticket.
Even though Democrats are known for the division within the party, it is my hope that we will come together and make common cause and elect a new president.
Would a Mondale-Hart ticket, as some suggest, make for that coming together?
I think it's an intriguing idea. Obviously, Mr. Hart has a great deal of pull in the West. Young candidate, although not that much younger chronologically than Mondale. He has the image of youth that Mr. Mondale does not have. And I think there would be some definite pluses if that would be the final resolution of that conflict.
I don't know whether Hart is willing to do that, but I think it probably would really strengthen the ticket, there's no question about it.
But I would think that any ticket that would combine the 3 leading candidates, Hart, Mondale, and Jackson, would be a very, very strong ticket.
My ideal would be to have a woman on there simply because it is going to help us defeat Ronald Reagan.
Give me
and
a
that's
name.
the purpose in this whole thing. I can give you lots of names. I would mention off the top of my head Geraldine Ferraro, Dianne Feinstein, Patricia Schroeder from California. I think that's a good Western mixture. Patricia has always been very, very good on the issues. Barbara Mikulski.
I think he definitely should look to a woman or a minority for the vice presidential seat.
I think is what great many of we leaders of the Democratic Party here in the West will be doing if former Vice President Mondale does secure the nomination. We'll be going to Gary Hart to support his place as the number 2 person, the vice presidential nominee, because what that will do will pull the party together on a nationwide basis to the point that that would be the strongest possible ticket that we could have and would unite the youth that he's been able to rally around with the old guard that Vice President Mondale has.
So that would be your preference if
that
Mondale emerges?
certainly would be my preference. I think it would be the strongest ticket possible to run against the Reagan-Bush nominations.
The convention keynote speech was delivered Saturday night by Bethene Church. She gave an emotional speech that frequently recalled the late Democratic Senator from Idaho, Frank Church, and his views on foreign policy. Here is some of what Bethene Church said about the Reagan administration's foreign policy.
This same president who stood on Omaha Beach and who made morning news on the day of our last primary, and his foreign policy advisors, Monsieur Schultz, Weinberger, and Casey, themselves in their 60s and 70s, never fired a shot or saw a shot fired in anger, never experienced personally the agony, the heartache, the fear, the confusion, or the carnage of modern war. And that wasn't even a nuclear situation. Perhaps that's why they're here. And perhaps that's why, too, they were afflicted by a me Tarzan and you Jane syndrome. Their only answer to survival in the jungle of international problems is the need to show they're tough. The word negotiation, as used tonight by John Kennedy, is now a dirty word. However, in order to show how tough they are, they don't swing through the trees like Tarzan. They send young Americans off to far places for no good reason, places where some of them have already died. Remember Lebanon? Have you noticed that the president doesn't speak much of it now? For now we're out, at the cost of 260 dead American boys. What did we accomplish for this cost? The Lebanese go on killing each other. Israel, as usual, looks out alone for its southern border. Syria sinks deeper into the quagmire of Lebanese politics. Can anyone tell me how American security was served by our being there? There never was American security interest in Lebanon. There was a Tarzan-like need to show how tough we were. Well, we, like the administration, do we, like the administration, forget how briefly tough and at what cost? After the withdrawal, the government quickly shifted to other places where the political consequences were not so noticeable, because it was harder for the American public to sort out the facts, such as the rest of the Persian Gulf, where the word oil sends reason swinging through the trees, and Nicaragua, where the different sides are very hard to keep straight, except for our CIA and its mines in the Nicaraguan harbor. Thank heavens, not our Marines yet, but for how long? We must realize that the Middle East, too, is going to continue to boil, and ancient disputes go on over land, oil, wealth, and especially religion. The war between Iraq and Iran combines all of these elements, and as Frank often half-laughingly used to say, it's a shame they can't both lose. Yet the Reagan administration, like a fly drawn to honey, seems unable to resist the temptation to be drawn into that bloody arena. Like a persistent suitor, it tries to generate an invitation from the Saudis for an introduction into Saudi Arabia of American combat forces. For us, a Lebanon again? The Saudis don't welcome the unrespected Western world. They just welcome our sophisticated weapons. And into whose hands could these weapons fall? And at what expense to all of us? If we could simply pause and reflect, instead of advertising our eagerness to join the Saudis in spite of their reluctance, we might see that there are others in that region who have more at stake in the outcome of these struggles than the United States. Therefore, American armed intervention, if ever justified at all, should indeed be a last, not a first resort. This is the basic lesson that the Reagan administration has continuously failed to learn. It is just as applicable in Central America as it is in the Persian Gulf and closer home. Our main mission in Central America seems to be the authorization of huge amounts of the money we need here to use for aid there, and the use of the CIA covertly to destabilize anyone who doesn't agree with us. And when the bodies are counted, we are never clear whether some group we backed or supplied with arms is responsible or not. And in the Nicaraguan or Salvadorian conflict, it's not easy to tell the white hats from the black hats. We just go on using force, and we call it help, and sink friend and foe alike. And we end up with everybody feeling the heavy hand of Big Brother 1984 style. But the most glaring lack in foreign policy comes in our approach to the Soviet Union. The administration started with an escalation of rhetoric, which turned to an escalation on both sides. Once again, we're in the me Tarzan, you Jane situation. Surely we have neither to love nor to trust the Russians to understand that if this world is going to survive at all in this nuclear age, we must figure a way to get along.
Bethune Church. That's our time for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. I'm Mark Johnson. Good night.
The funding for this program is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Friends of 4, 10, and 12.